They say life changes in a moment. But sometimes it doesn't just change, it splits in two. There's the before where everything feels stable, safe, familiar. And then there's the after where you're clawing your way through the rubble of your own illusions. For me, that moment happened at 7:26 a.m. merging onto the FDR from the East River Parkway late for a budget review meeting at Langford and Blythe, the investment firm where I'd spent the last 14 years climbing my way to the top. The sky was gray. I remember that. The kind of dull overcast that made the entire city look like a photo printed on cheap paper. My mind was on the coffee I hadn't had yet. I barely noticed the car drifting into the fast lane beside me. But I noticed something else. The light turned yellow. A delivery van in front of me slowed to a crawl. I touched the brakes. Nothing. I pressed harder. Still nothing. And that's when the realization hit. Not like a thought. More like a shockwave. The brakes were completely gone. I swerved onto the shoulder, scraping metal, sparks flying like fireworks in reverse. I could smell the rubber, burning bitter, choking. I yanked the wheel hard and brought the car to a stop inches from the barrier wall. My pulse roared in my ears. I sat frozen. The dashboard lights blinked at me like it was just another Tuesday. But I knew better. This wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted me dead. Later that day, the mechanic confirmed it. Brake lines were cut. Clean slice. Like it was done in a garage, not out on the road, he said, wiping grease off his hands as if he were just giving a weather update. And the fluid line was drained deliberately. This wasn't wear and tear. It was sabotage. I said nothing. Because what do you say when you suddenly realize the person sharing your bed might be trying to bury you 6 feet under? Or worse, letting someone else do it. I didn't tell the police. Not yet. I needed to think. Needed to be sure. I left the shop, walked to my car rental in a daze, and sat in the driver's seat staring at the dashboard. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think straight. But I remembered things. Late-night meetings. A phone that was always on silent. A look in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Guilt. Distance. Secrets. Rachel. My wife. My partner of 13 years. Mother to her daughter, Sophie. She said she was working late last night. Quarterly reports. Client dinner. Some vague combination of excuses that I'd stopped questioning 6 months ago. It had started so slowly, like fog creeping under a door. Until I could no longer tell when we'd stopped being a marriage and started being roommates with a mortgage. But this was different. This was beyond infidelity. Someone had tried to kill me. And I had a terrifying, suffocating instinct about who was behind it. His name had come up too many times. Too many late-night emails. Too many business trips that started when mine did. Too many company retreats where she returned with new jewelry and more distant eyes. Daniel Graves, the CEO of her firm. Powerful. Charismatic. Untouchable. I'd met him once. At a charity gala. He shook my hand like he wanted to snap my fingers. His smile was polished, perfect, and empty. And now I couldn't shake the thought. What if he wanted me gone? What if she did too? I couldn't go home that night. I needed time. So I went somewhere I hadn't been in years. My late father's lake cabin, 2 hours north. No cell reception. No surveillance. Just silence. And time to plan. I pulled out my laptop and did what I did best. I started following the money. Because I'm not just a husband. Not just a man who drives a car with faulty brakes. I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent my career digging into ledgers, contracts, offshore transfers, and ghost companies. I've exposed fraud rings, tax evasion schemes, and blackmail operations. People lie. Paper doesn't. And what I was about to uncover would not only confirm my worst fears, it would change everything. Starting with who my wife really was. And who our daughter's father might actually be. It's amazing what you find when you stop looking for comfort and start looking for evidence. I didn't sleep that night. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional groan of the old wood under the wind. But in my mind, a storm had already begun. By 2 a.m. I had Rachel's department's quarterly expense reports open on one screen and my own travel logs on the other. It took less than 20 minutes for the patterns to appear. $7,400 dinner at the Aurelius, the kind of place where you don't get in without a 6-week waitlist and a black card. Date, same night I was in Toronto for a financial audit. $3,200 corporate wellness suite booked at a resort outside the city. Date, 2 days after I flew to DC for a board compliance review. The same names kept showing up in approvals: Rachel Caldwell, Daniel Graves. Sometimes just initials. Sometimes aliases. But they weren't careful, not anymore. They'd gotten cocky. Predictable. One entry stood out. For nights at the Canova, a boutique hotel in Soho. Vendor conference, it claimed. I cross-referenced the room roster and found an internal memo buried in a Slack export. The rooms were for Daniel, Rachel, and 3 of his senior execs. All men. 5 rooms. But only 2 room service bills. My stomach turned. I closed the files and stared into the dark for a long time. What if this went deeper than an affair? What if I didn't just marry a liar, but someone helping cover up something far worse? I needed someone who could confirm what I suspected. The name came to me instantly. Silas Rourke. He used to work for the State Financial Crimes Unit. Quiet. Brilliant. The guy you sent in when you didn't just want the truth, but every painful detail wrapped in a neat little evidence box. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he answered my message within an hour. Still wake up thinking in spreadsheets? He asked. I smiled for the first time in 2 days. Worse, I think in red flags. He didn't ask why I needed him. He didn't have to. 3 hours later, I was sitting in his private office above a bail bonds shop in East Harlem, watching him spread surveillance photos across a table like tarot cards. She's not hiding it, Silas said, flipping one over. This was last week. Graves and your wife. Hand in hand. Suite 819. Grand Mayfield. She checked in under her maiden name. I leaned in, studying the image. Rachel was laughing. Her head tilted back in a way I hadn't seen in years. It looked intimate, natural, happy. But what Silas said next made that pain feel trivial. Graves isn't just sleeping with her, he said. He's laundering money through her. He laid out the timeline. 2 years ago, Rachel had been promoted to VP of Strategic Growth, a title that sounded important but had no clear duties. Around that same time, Daniel Graves began shifting funds out of the company's legitimate vendor network and into fake subsidiaries, shell companies with names like Mansfield Solutions and LCR Holdings. The money would ping-pong through accounts in Belize, Estonia, and Switzerland before landing in assets tied to offshore trusts. And the approvals? Signed by Rachel, or someone with access to her credentials. She's either a willing partner, Silas said, or a pawn who stopped asking questions. Either way, she's in deep. My hands clenched the edges of the table. How much? Roughly 11.4 million over 18 months. That's just what we've confirmed. And it gets worse, he added. Of course it did. He pulled out a manila folder, slid it across the desk. Do those eyes look familiar to you? I stared at the photo. A school yearbook page. My daughter, Sophie, smiling in a recital photo. Next to her, a younger boy. Same almond-shaped eyes. Same chin. Same crooked smile. His name, Miles Graves. Daniel's son. Born 7 years ago. A year before Sophie. But the resemblance was uncanny. Not just between the children. Between Sophie and Daniel. I leaned back, blood draining from my face. Silas didn't say anything. He didn't need to. DNA tests would come later. Confirmation would come later. But I knew. I had been raising another man's child. Loving her. Guiding her. Protecting her. And all this time they had laughed behind my back. Doesn't she look just like you? I had heard that phrase 100 times from Rachel's friends. Always with a strange lilt in their voice. I never thought twice. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. By the end of that week, I had over 600 pages of documentation. Wire transfers. Deleted emails recovered from corporate servers. Fake contracts. Phone recordings. Silas had bugged Daniel's private car and captured 3 conversations with Rachel. I shredded everything before the audit, she'd said. We just need him to stay out of the way, Daniel replied. And then this, if he disappears, nobody would ask questions. He's a ghost. Nobody even notices him at parties anymore. I replayed that sentence over and over. I had become a ghost. They had made sure of that. The quiet husband. The dependable provider. The idiot who asked nothing. Who questioned nothing. I let them write that version of me. But it was time I rewrote the story. I made 3 calls that night. The first was to a woman named Evelyn Marsh, Daniel Graves' estranged wife. She picked up on the second ring. "I've been waiting for this call," she said before I even introduced myself. The second was to a district attorney I knew from a previous case, one who owed me a favor. And the third? The third was to myself, to the man I used to be, cold, focused, unforgiving, because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was a war, and I was done waiting in the shadows. You'd be surprised how quickly enemies can become allies when they both realize they've been sleeping next to the same predator. Evelyn Marsh was once the queen of every black tie gala in Manhattan, the wife of Daniel Graves. Elegant, calculated, feared. And then, overnight, she vanished from the social scene. Quiet divorce. No statement. No public scandal. But those who knew the circles whispered. He bought her silence. They were wrong. He didn't buy it. She'd been waiting. Watching. Gathering. Like I had. We met in a private garden behind the Cardin Hotel in Midtown. I arrived early, ordered an espresso I didn't touch. She arrived in black sunglasses, a gray wool coat, and heels that didn't make a sound. "You're Noah," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "The accountant husband. The one they think is too dull to notice." I didn't answer. She reached into her purse and laid a silver flash drive on the table. 10 years of marriage. I kept everything. Photos, texts, transfers, passwords, recorded phone calls. "You want proof Daniel's a criminal? I've got volumes. You want proof your wife's helping him? I've got that too." I stared at the drive for a long second, then asked her the only question that mattered. "Do you want revenge or justice?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Same thing in this case. That week, we built an alliance out of glass and gasoline. We didn't just want to catch them. We wanted them cornered, exposed, powerless, not just behind bars but disgraced publicly by their own arrogance. Silas, my private investigator, set up hidden mics in Daniel's office and car. Evelyn used her old access credentials to get into his cloud accounts. I mapped the financial records and coded every transfer that tied him to shell companies, bribes, and the sabotage of corporate rivals. And then there was Rachel. My wife. The woman I'd built a life with. Shared a bed with. Buried my vulnerabilities inside. Silas caught her on tape again, this time with Daniel in his penthouse. They were laughing. Drinking champagne. "She still thinks he doesn't know," Daniel said. "Doesn't matter," Rachel replied. "He's a footnote. He can raise Sophie, pay the bills, and disappear quietly. He was never going to be anything more." He laughed. "So cruel. And then this. We should tell her after the wedding. Let her know the truth. That she's mine." I didn't know what broke first in me, the anger or the pain, but I felt both like steel cords pulling in opposite directions. It would be her wedding. Sophie's. Our daughter. A 21-year-old girl who still asked me to walk her down the aisle even after years of growing distance. Who still left sticky notes on the fridge. Who still looked at me like I was her hero. And here were her mother and biological father planning to reveal everything after the ceremony. As if love was a weapon. As if truth was a punishment. I made my decision that night. They wanted to make a scene after the wedding? Then I'd beat them to it. I'd make their destruction the main event. I called Evelyn. "The wedding's in 10 days. Can you be ready?" She didn't hesitate. "I've been ready for years." I told Silas to gather his full team. Former federal investigators. Surveillance experts. Cyber forensics. We'd need documentation, duplication, encrypted backups. Every piece of evidence needed to be airtight, admissible, visible, and devastating. We even contacted 2 former employees of Daniel's who'd been blackballed and discredited after raising questions years ago. Evelyn offered them immunity through her legal team in exchange for testimony. Then we spoke to the district attorney's office. A hard-nosed prosecutor named Dana Hill agreed to issue preliminary warrants, sealed pending the final evidence drop. We had everything but the match. And then Rachel lit it for me. It was a Tuesday night. I was home earlier than expected. She walked in smelling like wine and smoke, her lipstick smudged. She froze when she saw me. I was seated at the kitchen table holding a small red velvet box. She blinked. "What's that?" "A gift," I said softly. She opened it. Inside, a Cartier bracelet, the exact one Daniel bought her last month. Still tagged with the corporate expense ID sticker I'd pulled from her work reports. Her face paled. "I found the invoice," I continued. "Filed as business development tools. Interesting phrase for adultery." She tried to speak. I stopped her. "You don't need to lie anymore, Rachel. I know. About Daniel. About Sophie. About the money. About the documents you've been shredding on his behalf. She sat down slowly. You don't understand, Oh, I do, I said. You're not just cheating on your husband. You're laundering money for a white-collar crime syndicate in a pencil skirt. And worse, you tried to have me killed. She flinched. I didn't. You didn't know the brake lines were cut? I said. Funny. Because Silas has a tape of you telling Daniel you were worried it hadn't worked. Want to hear it? Her mouth opened, closed. Then she said the one thing that truly broke me. We were going to let you live. You could have had your quiet little life. Why dig? Why ruin it all? And that was it. That was the moment I felt nothing for her anymore. Not even hatred. Just clarity. You're going to that wedding, I told her. You'll sit next to Daniel. You'll smile. You'll play the part. And then, when it's time, I'll show everyone exactly who you are. She smirked. You think anyone will believe you? Daniel owns that room. No, I said. He owns the lie. I own the proof. 10 days. That's all it took to line up the final piece. Sophie had no idea, of course. She was too focused on final fittings, floral orders, rehearsal chaos. She kept telling me how proud she was, how happy she was. I smiled. I nodded. I said all the right things. But behind my eyes, I was already sharpening the blade. I wasn't going to just survive the betrayal. I was going to redefine what revenge meant. The only question was, would they run or would they burn? The morning of the wedding was painfully beautiful. Blue sky, cool breeze, the kind of weather that makes people believe in blessings. But I'd stopped believing in blessings a long time ago. Truth was the only thing I believed in now. I buttoned my shirt, fixed the cufflinks Sophie had picked for me. Gold, engraved with the date she was born, and looked at myself in the mirror. Today wasn't about vengeance. Not anymore. It was about taking back control. About showing my daughter that the people who claim to love you the most can still be the ones who burn you from the inside out. And that surviving them, exposing them, is the beginning of freedom. The ceremony was held at an estate upstate. All glass walls and rolling hills. Hundreds of guests, many from Daniel's corporate circle. Rachel played the radiant mother of the bride in her pale rose dress, not a hair out of place. Daniel smiled like a politician, greeting donors like old friends. I waited. The vows were said. The kiss was made. And just as Sophie turned to walk back down the aisle with her new husband, I gave the signal. Silas moved first, then Evelyn. Then the officers from the district attorney's office stepped into the aisle. Gasps, a murmur, and then I walked forward, microphone in hand, and said calmly, before we begin the celebration, there's something you all should see. A projector flickered to life on the wall behind the altar. And then the images began. Bank statements, shell companies, signed contracts, surveillance photos, and finally audio. Rachel's voice. I shredded everything before the audit. Daniel's. If he disappears, nobody asks questions. He's already invisible. Gasps turned to silence. Then to shouting. Then to screams when the officers moved in. Daniel Graves was arrested for corporate fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Rachel Caldwell was named an accomplice. The look on her face when they took her away wasn't fear. It was shock, as if betrayal had only been a game until someone actually decided to fight back. The wedding ended early. The reception hall emptied. The flowers were still fresh, the cake still untouched. And in the corner, Sophie sat alone, the veil still in her lap, her hands shaking. I knelt in front of her. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Not for what I did, but for the day I chose to do it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You knew for how long? Long enough, I said. Is it true? Her voice was barely a whisper. About Mom? About Daniel? About me? I nodded. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. Even if you're not my biological father, you're still my dad. I didn't answer. I just sat beside her, held her hand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real, seen, free. Daniel lost everything. The company, his reputation, his freedom. Rachel's trial came later. She cried in court, blamed him, blamed stress, blamed everyone but herself. It didn't matter. They sentenced her anyway. And me? I rebuilt. Quietly, steadily. I didn't care about applause. I didn't want vindication. I wanted a life that wasn't built on lies. And this time I was going to live it for me. Not for her. Not for Sophie. Not even for justice. Just for truth. Because once you've faced the worst kind of betrayal and survived it, there's nothing left to fear. Only the fire in your own hands. And the power to burn the past to ash.